Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the In the Trenches podcast. I'm Cal Davenport, your host, and here with me is Seth Ruth. Seth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Cal.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. We're getting into a subject that has come up a lot in the trenches in the past. We've talked a bit about the Sohrab Ahmari and David French debate, sort of the what you might call the fusionist consensus or the Reagan consensus or whatever this sort of libertarian leaning side of the conservative movement might be referred to, or the procedural liberalism. And then on the other side, we have Ahmari and Rusty Reno at First Things and other authors who sort of represent this idea of a more nationalist, more protectionist, more populist, and kind of a more traditional wing of conservatism. And we've kind of talked a little bit about that debate and where conservatism is going and the content of it. And so we're really excited to have a guest on to talk about this in more detail. He's written a great piece. So we have Jordan Alexander Hill, who is an independent journalist based in Massachusetts. He's the host of the Western Canon podcast, and you can follow him on Twitter at Western Canon Pod. And again, we're speaking to him today about the New Right, and that is the subject of an essay he wrote in Quillette called The Return of the Strong Gods. Jordan, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me, fellas. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And tell us, first of all, how'd you come to write this story about the New Right?
I suppose I came to write it because I'd been fascinated by the debate for a while, as is probably the case with you guys. I listened to a bunch of conservative podcasts and read a bunch of conservative books. I think what really got me here is the fact that I've been a libertarian for so long, really kind of into libertarian politics and libertarian ideas. I'm not really a pundit. I'm more of a philosopher. And so I've always been really taken with libertarianism and natural rights theory and Robert Nozick. And, quite a while ago also, Ayn Rand was probably the person that got me into libertarianism. I think that's true for a lot of young people. And I was starting to see a kind of new current on the right. I think American conservatism for a really long time has been defined by this kind of language of natural rights, limited government, subsidiarity, negative rights, freedom from government, freedom to order your own affairs as you see fit. So it's a kind of a deep and abiding American individualism that I think has defined the conservative movement since at least Goldwater. And I think we're starting to see a resurgence of a kind of what do you want to call it? A kind of old world, a kind of borders, workers, soil. I don't want to say blood and soil because there's a lot of really good people on the New Right that aren't arguing for any kind of race essentialism. In fact, they make the reverse argument a lot of times. And so I think you're seeing the resurgence of a kind of Burkean conservatism that's kind of challenging the dogmas of atomistic libertarianism, and increasingly are beginning to see libertarian economics, libertarian rhetoric as a kind of setback for conservative priorities. And so I found that really interesting, being a kind of conservatarian. Charles C.W. Cook, I suppose, would be the person who most closely aligns with the kind of Ben Shapiro type of libertarian conservatism. And we're starting to see a move away from that. And I think that the New Right is actually growing, and I think it's actually going somewhere. And I think that the unrest in the country has a little bit to do with the dissonance between the kind of struggle over the future of conservatism, to be honest.
So let's drill down on that a little bit, because you have a thesis about the new right. I think a lot of people have an idea of where a lot of these thinkers are going, and they're sort of seeing political movements these days fitting in with sort of the intellectual current. And you have a little bit of a different take on that. So I wanted you to dig into it. What's the new right versus what the other stuff that we're seeing going on, and what are your thoughts?
Oh, okay. So are you asking like what's the difference between the new right and some of the more dangerous currents that are going on? Is that what you're asking?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I don't, I think one of the things I actually tried to get across in my article is how diverse the conservative movement is, how diverse the Republican Party actually is. Really, right now, there are only a couple of different types of liberals. There are there are the classical liberals who are increasingly alienated from the Democratic Party, and there's the progressive wing in line with the sort of AOC wing, and then there's the sort of moderate Democrats, and I think that's a shrinking part of the Democratic Party. On the right, you see a much more diverse landscape, right? You have the diehard Trumpers, you have the sometimes Trumpers, you have these are people who like what who like what Trump did in areas like judges and deregulation and the Second Amendment and foreign policy and the economy and things like that. The return of manufacturing, immigration. Then there are the never Trumpers, right? The old guard, right? And there are even like people who aren't never Trump Republicans who are more moderate Republicans, like country club, Chamber of Commerce Republicans, like John Kasich. And the people that get invited on CNN and MSNBC to pretend like they're deeply conservative, and what they usually do is just nod along with the CNN host. Then you have the libertarian, conservatarian sort of Mises caucus kind of wing. You have the Catholic tradcons. You have even what C. Bradley Thompson has been calling pajama boy Nietzscheans, right? A kind of what followers of Bronze Age pervert, and this kind of really pagan Nietzschean, almost nihilistic right wing sentimentality. So I think it's really difficult to parse that out because the Republican Party really is so diverse. But I would say that the new right, as I'm calling the new right, I'm thinking of the people who write over at First Things magazine. I'm thinking about the kind of they're describing themselves as common good conservatives. I'm thinking about the Catholic traditionalists and folks like that. These are people, many of whom were not even supportive of Trump. Folks like Patrick Deneen, who is writing about liberalism's kind of inherent contradictions as he sees them. He is someone who believes that he's a traditionalist conservative, and that he's really speaking up for the other two legs of the kind of fusionist stool that have been ignored in favor of a kind of laissez-faire, free market, liberal individualism. And I think most of the people on the new right are just standing up for the other, for the sort of undefended last final leg of that stool, social conservatism. And one of the interesting things is you see that these are people that feel like liberalism hasn't really served conservative ends in the way that we were always promised that liberalism would, right? The idea of freedom from government, limited government, the kind of the Reagan Thatcher kind of philosophy of this idea that if we just pursue a philosophy of natural rights and subsidiarity, right? The idea that power should be nested at the lowest levels possible, delegated by the least centralized competent authorities. If we just focus on this sort of negative liberty, kind of Lockean freedom, then we can just order our own affairs and we're free then to live our social conservative values. And people like Deneen and Sohrab Ahmari and others are making the case that that's not working. that increasingly that philosophy isn't enough. And there are even people like Christopher Caldwell who are saying one of the reasons that's not enough is because we have a kind of new constitution that's come to overwrite the old constitution in the civil rights legislation that we've seen in the 20th century. Just the idea that anti-discrimination laws come to basically eclipse and overwrite all of the freedom of association values that were embedded in the Bill of Rights and in the fundamental spirit of the Constitution. So I think that's how I would phrase it. And one of the last things I would say is that the new right is also increasingly, they're not quite in line with the kind of anti-elitism that you see among the sort of Trump deplorable camp. They now refer to themselves as the deplorables, right? As a kind of mockery of Hillary Clinton. People like Deneen, people like David Azarad, people like Mark Bauerlein believe that we need a new elite. They don't believe in tearing down the elites in a kind of right-wing iconoclastic fashion. They believe that a democratic republic is always going to need elites, but that our elites have failed us and we need better elites.
So my question is, when you first started writing this story, at least thinking about it, were you at all skeptical of the new right? And because many kind of perceive them as these illiberal, a faction of the Republican Party, and I just kind of wonder, were you hesitant about writing this, and because you didn't actually want to be, because there's just a lot of people who kind of not dismiss them, but they're scared of them. And scared, like there's some sort of white nationalism or whatever that's going on. So were you at all like kind of scared to even approach this, like kind of like as a third rail sort of thing?
To be honest, no. I've always been very outspoken. I'm actually a public school English and philosophy teacher. I do that for a living to make my money, and then I write on the weekends and sometimes in the afternoons and sometimes on my breaks. And so I probably should be afraid to write about this stuff. I don't know why I'm not. I just feel like if I maybe it's my ignorant, naive libertarianism. I just feel like if a place wants to fire me for something as minor as writing about the culture, then maybe that's a place that I don't want to work. Or maybe I'm just in a very privileged position to be able to say that. But no, I wasn't afraid to write about this, but I am a little bit afraid of fully joining. I still don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I believe in liberalism. But what I wanted to do with that piece was understand the new right on its own terms. One of the things I found that was really interesting was after I wrote the piece, I was hearing from people on the new right thanking me for writing the piece, and I was getting angry stuff from the liberal right. I had talked to Jonah Goldberg for the article, and Jonah asked me, he had seen some of my previous pieces, and I guess he liked how the interview I did with him went. We had a very long, like almost 2-hour long conversation, and he asked me if I wanted to write for the Dispatch, and I said, yeah, maybe I'll submit something in January. And after I wrote the piece, he hasn't responded to anything that I've said, and I've actually found that I got a bunch of hate from. And by the way, I love Jonah Goldberg. I think he's a brilliant guy. I think Suicide of the West is one of the best books of the 21st century in terms of intellectual conservatism. But I think maybe he got a little bit mad at me. I hope not, but maybe he's just really busy with everything that's going on. But I got a lot of notes from people on the more liberal conservative side, and some of my friends at work were like, almost like, why are you trying to understand them? Like, why are you? And so what I wanted to do with that article is I am a liberal. I'm a conservatarian. I believe in limited government and natural rights and capitalism. You know, I'm a capitalist radical, right? I love John Locke and the natural rights philosophy that comes out of the Enlightenment and is codified in our American documents. But I got a lot of hate from the liberal side of conservatism. And I got a lot of notes about that article. And the people who are really happy with it were the new right. I actually got a note from Sohrab Ahmari, and he said that he felt I demonized him in my article, but that he actually wanted me to write a review for his new book. And so he's sending me an advanced copy of it. And I got a nice note from David Azerrad, and I feel like I was a little bit critical of some of the new right, but they're so used to being beaten up. They're so used to being strawmanned. They're so used to being taken out of context that even a friendly, neutral journalist who just wants to unpack what they are actually saying, not what they're not saying, right? Who wants to understand the new right and some of the things that they've been saying, as they make a lot of great points. The new right, folks like Patrick Deneen, these are brilliant scholars. Adrian Vermeule, they're making good arguments. They're supporting their arguments with evidence, and they're drawing on a long history of conservatism, obviously dating back to Greek reason and Judeo-Christianity, but they're drawing on folks like Edmund Burke and these are mainstream thinkers, and I wanted to really engage with their ideas. When you listen to them, they make a lot of sense. And even let's say you're a liberal conservatism and you're not ready to give up Enlightenment reason or sort of Lockean conservatism yet. There's still a lot to be learned from them, how liberalism can go too far, liberalism and its discontents, the liberal anti-culture, all of the sort of ways in which liberalism can kind of turn in on itself and become something that's actually quite oppressive. If we have to earn our freedom, we have to deserve our freedom. And I think a lot of the sort of what Beltway insider, cozy DC cocktail party conservative types, the Bill Kristols, I don't see what they're defending. I don't see what they're conserving. This idea of you don't like it, so build your own Twitter. You can't build your own Twitter, so build your own app store, build your own cell phone, build your own payment processor, build your own internet. Like, the new right is making important arguments that we have to grapple with, even if we decide that at the end of the day we disagree about exactly how to proceed. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that both Seth and I were interested in having you on to talk about this is because we felt like it really does the new right justice in terms of just being a very straightforward documentation of what they say. And I think your quoting of Jonah Goldberg at the end of the piece is straightforward reporting as well. Your own opinion doesn't come through, and it's a great way of, I think, helping people who are maybe unfamiliar with the differences between sort of this intellectual wing that is the new right from some of the other nationalists and protectionist tendencies within the right and within the Republican Party these days. I think is very important. It's very enlightening. And your piece is actually the first place that I've read about a positive and specific program from the new right, and that's mostly in quoting Patrick Deneen on a few policy prescriptions that he's talked about. But why do you think it is? We've noticed the same thing. Why do you think it is that the new right has struggled really to put forward a specific policy agenda?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, to be honest with you, and not to evade the question, because it's a really important question, I think it has a lot to do with a lot of the other failures of the right in general. I think that one of the things that we can't forget is that the right deserves a lot of the failures that it has accomplished, so to speak. The left for the past 50, 60 years has been slowly working its way into every single institution in the United States of America, from Hollywood to academia, from social work to K through 12 education. Every institution of American public life is owned and dominated by the left's rules, by their philosophy, by their language. At work, just to be a high school English teacher, I have to attend very illiberal anti-racist trainings, quote unquote anti-racist trainings, in which, you know, the presenter tells me that whiteness is part of an evil ideology. I think that while the left has been busy transforming our institutions since basically the sexual revolution, since the 60s, the left has been just coming to dominate every aspect of American life, from our administrative agencies, down to early childhood education, and I could keep going on, but I think that while the left has been busy producing culture, music, movies, art, the right has been cordoning itself off in think tanks and giving their money to these dead institutions that don't do anything anymore, that don't preserve anything. And so I think that one of the reasons that you see that the new right, actually, there was a recent piece, I pulled this up because I was just reading it, but apparently it was written a long time ago. It was by Michael Knowles at the Daily Wire. And Michael's a smart guy. He's kind of a troll, but he wrote an article for The American Mind, which is a Claremont publication. And his article is "It's Good to Be Against Things." It's a great article. And the whole article is about how we need to have this new coalition that is entirely against things. And he starts the article by saying, what does Blair White have in common with Timothy Gordon? What do all these people that you wouldn't think have anything in common? What do they have in common? Why are they uniting? And he starts to talk about the fact that you have this new coalition of people who are against woke. And I think in being against woke and in airing a kind of grievance politics and in doing that, at the same time, the left has been actually getting busy creating curriculum, advancing social programs, and getting things done. So I think the right deserves a lot of its failures. And to be clear, I actually like Michael Knowles and I like his piece in The American Mind. Because I actually think he's right. I think that the future, the way forward right now, is an anti-woke party. I think you can run on that right now, and I think we can compromise. I think the tradcons and the conservatarians and the establishment types can compromise on how to move forward, but the new party needs to be anti-woke. It needs to do what Daily Wire's doing. It needs to move into the culture. It needs to make movies. It needs to stop with the Philistinism. People on the right are just famously anti-intellectual, and that's got to stop. That's got to end. I think Patrick Deneen and Sohrab Ahmari are right. Go ahead and read what Sohrab Ahmari writes. I just read in, The American Conservatism. He did a review of Midsummer and Hereditary and these horror films. I think that the new right should start to participate in culture, needs to, Daily Wire just put out a movie called Run, Hide, Fight, and all the conservatives came out and talked about the fact that there was naughty language in it and that it was offensive. Give me a break. That is over. The days of, we can't be producing Hallmark culture. It needs to be real. It needs to be gritty. It needs to be The Sopranos and The Godfather. It needs to be Breaking Bad. That's what conservative culture needs to be. So I don't know. That's a long-winded, indirect way of answering your question, probably.
I mean, I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. But however, when you talk about, this grievance politics, aren't the right doing the same thing? Just in, as far as, them focusing on the working class, and that's a form of identity politics. And does this have a chance to backfire on them? Give me your thoughts.
That's a great question. I'm with Jonathan Haidt on this one. I think that I don't think identity politics per se is a bad thing. When you get together a bunch of people who feel like their workplace isn't treating them right, let's say you're stock boys at a grocery store and you get together and you form a union. That's a form of identity politics. It's based on a specific domain of your identity, which is you're a stocker of shelves at a store. When the fishermen get together and argue for better safety conditions, it's a form of identity politics. What we want to do on the right is to establish a common humanity identity politics, not a common enemy identity politics, right? We don't want to repeat what the Marxists did, right? Where they break the world into oppressor and oppressed. The bourgeoisie are the bad people. It's a very Manichaean worldview. The people, the proletariat, the workers, those are the good people who are totally virtuous, and then there's the bad people over there. And if we could just collectivize the farms and send all of the kulaks to the gulags, everything will be better, and we'll usher in utopia. As you've seen in the 20th century, the left, of course, because their Marxist ideology has been totally discredited. Communism killed 100 million people in the 20th century. The examples are too numerous almost to count, right? The Soviet Union and China and Cambodia and Romania and Cuba. I could go on and on, East Germany. That ideology has been completely discredited. As Jordan Peterson has pointed out, they've gone to this kind of neo-Marxism, right? Taking that oppressed, what do they call it? Conflict theory, and shifting it onto racial identity groups. Now, white males are the oppressor, and everyone else is a kind of coalition of the dispossessed. We cannot do that in reverse on the right. We need to be universalist. We need to be embracing the new voters that voted for the Republican Party this last go around. Hispanics and Cubans, and Trump increasing his share of the black vote. I think that the right moving forward does need to appeal to the working class, and does need to frame issues in a way that is going to. I mean, look, right now we're living through a time when working class people, lower middle class people can't afford to have kids. They can't afford to purchase their own homes. They can't afford to participate in the American dream. They're struggling with a suicide epidemic, a spike in men and women in suicide, drug addiction, obesity. One of the interesting things when I was talking to David Azerrad, he was trying to say, we need to stop romanticizing Trump voters, because there are a bunch of pathologies in Trump's base that we need to take seriously, and we have to call it out by name. We can't just be like, oh, these are the virtuous proletariat angels, and all of that sort of thing. Azerrad said these people are obese. They're watching porn nonstop. They have a lot of problems, and we're not going to be able to fix the right until we fix a lot of those problems, I think.
Does that mean, so I hear from a lot of people that politics is upstream from culture, the sort of Andrew Breitbart, I think, said that. And a lot of, like, from the Jonah side will say, well, yes, but this should be a cultural problem. Government shouldn't have any business in this. And the new right, like, Patrick Deneen and others say, well, maybe there is some government jurisdiction here. And so what do you say to that? Do you think they're right in that respect, or no?
See, here's the thing. I totally agree with Jonah on this, but there's a big problem, okay? I agree with Jonah. I do not agree with the new right when it comes to using the government to promote virtue when it comes to promoting the common good in this sort of ecumenical sense in the public square, reordering the public square, or as Adrian Vermeule wants, is he wants a kind of right-wing living constitutionalism. I don't want any of that. At the same time, Jonah never talks about the culture. Okay, he makes Homer Simpson jokes. Here I am, like, I feel like I'm almost insulting Jonah. I love Jonah and I read his work all the time. But the big problem is Jonah doesn't attack what's going on with the whole trans movement thing. He almost never talks about abortion and pro-life issues. So a lot of these guys who are saying that we should fight these fights at the cultural level aren't fighting these fights at the cultural level. He's not talking about the sort of tyranny of big tech. Okay, make the sort of platitudinous cliche libertarian point. Make the point that these are private companies. Go ahead and make that point. But it can't stop there. You can't just say these are private companies, they can do whatever they want. Duh, they're private companies and they can do whatever they want. But why aren't you criticizing them at least? Right? When you go to a restaurant and there's bad service at the restaurant, you don't sit there and say they're a private company, they could do what they want. You complain about the bad service. It's ridiculous. So Jonah and David French and the others never talk about the culture, about the left-wing bias of the Jonah's never talking about these campus political correctness meltdowns, students occupying the president's offices, entire universities just melting down. Ben Shapiro wants to go a mainstream little Jewish guy, completely non-threatening, nice little good boy Jewish guy, Orthodox Jew, goes to speak at Berkeley, and the entire campus melts down, and it costs $600,000 to defend this guy's life so that he can argue for lower taxes and pro-life cause. I cannot believe that Jonah and David French and the people over at the Bulwark and even sometimes the folks over at National Review, I just feel like their head is in the clouds a lot of times. And I think you cannot simultaneously say that all of this should be left to the culture, and then you're someone who for a living is a pundit and a writer in the public space, and you're not talking at all about how churches are being decimated, and we're losing our religious freedom, and we're losing our freedom of association, and the fact that in Virginia, you'll now be fired if you refuse to use a student's preferred pronoun, whatever it happens to be. That's now considered a form of harassment. They're not talking about this stuff, right? The left is arguing that men can become women, that like a bearded man like me, that if I say I'm a woman, I'm a woman. And Jonah's talking about lower marginal tax rates and occupational licensing reform. Okay, that stuff's important, but you can't do both of those things. You can't argue that the state shouldn't get involved in anything, but then also, like, if I bring up in our discussion with Jonah, if I bring up the trans issue, he looks really nervous. And why am I not nervous to talk about it when Jonah is completely safe and he's nervous to talk about it? The right has no spine. And I think that's one of the things that Trump did, is that the right, I think, has a spine now. And the question is, do they have too much spine given what we've seen in the past few weeks? The right is ready to fight, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of the connection that the reason that the new right and Trumpism are equated is that we see a willingness. There's a shared desire to fight. It seems like, especially on cultural issues. I mean, we couldn't have imagined before Trump a president who would tweet about what NFL players are doing, for example,
right?
Which I think is very popular.
Or showing up at the March for Life,
right.
Or saying, stand up for our flag. He's not forcing them to stand. but he's saying, stand up for our flag. These are some of the moments that I love. I don't know if you've noticed, but the culture has changed, Cal, a little bit, where there was this sense before Trump was elected that we couldn't talk about anything. We couldn't talk about the political correctness. We couldn't talk about the trans issue. We couldn't talk about immigration. We couldn't talk about this new sort of Maoist diversity training. Trump, as Ben Shapiro likes to say, is a hammer in search of a nail. Sometimes he hits a nail, sometimes he hits a baby. But when he hits a nail like immigration, something that we weren't allowed to talk about before Trump, let's at least have an immigration policy. Can we at least have an immigration policy? That's all Trump was asking for. I may not have agreed with his solutions on immigration, but Trump, now we can talk about it again. I'm free to talk about it again. I've noticed a kind of, maybe it doesn't seem like it because tech platforms are banning people left and right, but I think actually a space has opened up to talk about some of these hard issues. And I think Trump cleared that space out. And I think the next question will be is what will the conservative movement do now that a space has been cleared out to talk about some of these cultural issues? What will the conservative movement do with that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you hit on something very interesting there. And I think that it's that when the thing that I always noticed that especially the new right would really criticize Trump on was, how he goes out on Twitter and says kind of these controversial and generally insane things, because it seems almost like here he brings up a topic, even in a controversial way, and opens up the space to talk about it. And then with his kind of crazy tweets, he goes and he fills that vacuum and then sucks all of the air out of that debate. So he almost like blew the opportunity that he created in many cases. And I think that was very frustrating for the new right. And so it's interesting to see kind of that distinction of where there's an agreement from that wing of conservatism with sort of the Trump and the movement and his behavior and things like that, and where there's differences and where there's similarities there. And that kind of brings me to, since we're talking about that comparison between this group and the piece that you wrote was published 3 days before the storming of the U.S. Capitol. And since then, members of the new right have, and I think, for example, of a friend of the podcast, Josh Hammer, tweeted about this. The members of the new right have attempted to further distance and distinguish themselves from the Trump movement. Do you think the new right bears some responsibility for how the new right has been equated with Trumpism? Have they not been clear enough about the differences and have been maybe a little bit too quick to have a transactional relationship with Trump?
Yeah, see, that's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to answer because I'm definitely not a pundit, and I do think of myself as more of a philosopher. I'm most comfortable talking about conservative ideas, but I get stuck being the pundit sometimes. I don't know what to make of that because here I have been being essentially a libertarian. I'm literally a registered member of the Libertarian Party. And I spend a lot of my time thinking and talking about libertarian ideals. Again, I wrote that piece to be almost as a form of constructive criticism of my own ideology and of my own ideas, and as a kind of reminder of, and also, of course, it's kind of like capitalism. It's not a totalizing value system. Libertarianism is a sort of a sphere in which you can order your own activities. And then, of course, you're free to be as liberal or as conservative as you want. It's really a position that you have against the state. So I really haven't been, I'm a little less sort of taken by those questions of whether and the extent to which the new right has been is overly transactional with Trump. One thing I'll say is this. Folks like Patrick Deneen weren't and aren't Trump supporters. And folks like Sohrab Ahmari aren't out there in the public sphere rambling on our God King Emperor Trump. he's really talking about things like Catholic integralism and virtue and ordered liberty and things like that. So I don't know. I think that's a little bit of an unfair. I think that's a little bit of an unfair. I think that also I don't want to accept the premise that the 500 or whatever goons that stormed the Capitol, the most radical online, basement dwelling, social media obsessed QAnon weirdos that are online. Try to remember what the internet is. The internet allows 5 guys from Texas and 5 guys from Louisiana and 5 guys from Maine and 6 guys from California and 10 people from every state to get together and share their weird ideology and to pretend and to act like there's something bigger than they are. It allows the Unite the Right rally to get together in Charlottesville and think that there's something bigger than they are. I still think that even though the right has certain dangerous pockets, right? There are still dangerous pockets of white nationalism and white supremacy in the United States. I don't know, guys. I just witnessed about 6 months straight of riots across the United States. 33 people or more died in the riots across the nation, more than $2 billion of property damage. A lot of these are minority-owned businesses. I just watched the left basically burn our major American cities to the ground. What happened, what happened at the Capitol was a tragedy. And it was also, I think, an anomaly. I think there's a kind of internet conspiracy theory rage about it. It shouldn't have happened. I don't know how it was allowed to happen, but the idea that 3 days before that everything was fine in the Republican Party, and then 3 days later, suddenly the right is completely and totally sick because of what this small group of individuals did. I don't know. I don't really know what to make of it. I'm still kind of processing it, to be honest with you.
Well, then let me just change the question slightly, because I think the real question is, can this new right survive without Trump? I think that is it's not so much about the Capitol and what happened there. It's so much of, this Trump's response to the Capitol rioting and all that has caused people to maybe pull back a little bit from the new right faction. And so in which case there's a vacuum there for the zombie Reaganism, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, to come in and still be the majority of the Republican Party. And so I guess the question is, do you think that this new right, this faction, can succeed without Trump?
It's a good question. I like what Jonah Goldberg said. I quoted him in saying this, that he didn't think the kayfabe aspect, that the sort of pro wrestling aspect of the Trump presidency could be fulfilled by anyone else, as Goldberg put it. He just didn't buy the fact that these MAGA Trump supporting, flag waving MAGA rally people were going to sit there and listen to Mike Pence's turgid policy proposals. And I think that Jonah Goldberg is ultimately right about that. But I do think that there's room for people like, and this will probably get me in trouble because he's so hotly controversial right now, mostly because he did what a lot of other people in the Republican Party were doing, which was allowing Trump to question the election results. And of course, he saw protesters outside of the Capitol and raised his fist. But folks like Josh Hawley, folks like Matt Gaetz, folks like and I'm making a big tent here because and folks that are a little bit closer to my beliefs, like Rand Paul. Rand Paul is probably the closest politician. Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Justin Amash, Ted Cruz, maybe what Ted Cruz used to be, is a little closer to what I believe. But I think there is actually a future for a lot of these figures. I think this is what Mark Bauerlein told me. Mark Bauerlein is a senior editor at First Things Magazine. He's an Emory professor. He's been on my podcast a couple of times. And what Mark Bauerlein was saying, it's not just Trump. Trump is probably gone. He's not gone from the national scene, but we'll see how tied up in lawsuits he gets, and we'll see if he manages to avoid jail time. And here, I'm not a Trump supporter. Actually, to be honest with you, I know I'm speaking in kind of positive terms about him, but I find Trump to be, hopefully your listeners don't get too upset at me here, I find Trump to be grotesque. I think he's a boor, and I think he lacks character, and I think he's a Philistine and all of this stuff. But what Bauerlein, Azerrad, and many of the other major conservatives I was speaking to said to me was, what the base wants is someone who will fight for them, someone who will stand up for them. It doesn't just have to be Trump. Maybe that whoever replaces Trump will have a harder time filling stadiums, but I do think there's a future for politicians in the Republican Party and even pundits in the conservative space, people who will fight back against the left's Maoist political correctness, their moral relativism. And I think it needs to be a blend of sophisticated culture and propaganda. By propaganda, I don't mean to sound like a tyrant or something like that. I mean it in the original sense of the word, and in the best sense of the word is a kind of almost mythos in Plato's Republic, right? Art that helps people move out of the cave and into the light. I think it needs to be a blend of that. It needs to be a blend of calling a spade, calling a thing what it is. There are certain lines that I think and I think the new right has identified this. There are we cannot back down from certain fundamental issues, like what is a woman? If we can't agree on what is a woman, it's over. There's not going to be a Republican Party. That is axiomatic. We need to defend these central things. There are these memes that have come out in the past couple of years. I don't know if you've seen them. And the meme has a conservative in the year 2300 or 2050 or 2100. And the conservative is conserving sort of the most disgusting things, like, but we're against pedophilia and we're against this and we're against that. So there's this sense that conservatives haven't been conserving anything for the past 50 years. And I think that there's a new ballsiness to the new right. And I think whoever replaces Trump, whether it's Tucker Carlson, there's been some conversation about that, whether it's Donald Trump Jr., whether it's a sort of Josh Hawley, right? We'll see what happens to Josh Hawley. It's good that Regnery just saved his book. We'll see if people like that can learn a lesson from Trump. And I think the lesson that needs to be learned is pay attention to the working class, pay attention to your base and what it wants, fight back, punch the left right back, because they're not afraid to punch us. So we can't be afraid to punch back, build cultural institutions. Trump is a cultural figure. I'm sure Trump is going to start Trump TV or something like that. So I think that's what the right needs to do. And to your question, I think the right can preserve Trumpism without Trump, but they may need Trump's help in that. They may need Trump from the outside helping in that fight.
Yeah, it sounds to me almost like if there's a space for a more polished culture warrior at the top of the movement. Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't be concerned about pissing off our listeners, because Seth and I both we've been strong critics of Trump from the beginning. So anybody who would not be fans of that would be they're probably not listening to the show.
Okay, I only listened to one episode of your show before you guys asked me on, and I listened to the most recent one, and it was about movies, and I was like, oh, this is fun. But I haven't listened to most of your other stuff, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, we've been critics of Trump. I think in some ways I'm more sympathetic, partly because I'm a Claremonster. So
Oh, you are?
yes, so so I'm a little bit more sympathetic to some of the stuff that's been talking about on the Omari side. And what I loved about your piece, and there's two things I loved about it. One was it was purely coming from a journalistic type of story. There was no opinion, there was no nothing. It was just, here's what these people are saying, and and um and trying to understand them in their terms. I think the right has missed a lot of that. There's a lot of opinion pieces. No one does the journalistic stuff anymore. I mean, I know that's what the Dispatch is trying to do, but I think the Dispatch has limited themselves in some ways to to talk only to the anti-Trumpers, and that has
Yeah.
limited them.
Have you seen their comment section? If you read the Dispatch, I'm a subscriber, right? So my criticism of folks like Jonah Goldberg is a loving one, because what was it my karate teacher said? If I'm criticizing you, it means I respect you and I think you can do better. His articles, many of them are thoughtful. But if you go to the comment section underneath, all of the comments are from leftists. Just go pull up a Dispatch article. All of the comments underneath are berating the article above for being too conservative. And the articles are barely conservative. I just read a piece by David French, and it was about critical race theory. And he spent the first 3/4 of the article arguing for why he totally understands why there's an impulse to do critical race theory. And there are many good ideas with intersectionality. And there's a lot of it that actually does kind of make sense. But ultimately, as a Christian, I just can't fully get on board with intersectional woke identity. It's like, dude, this critical race theory is straight up racist. It's racist. Replace the word white with any other race, and you're a Ku Klux Klaner. Dude, you have to be able to call. And that's, I think, to your point, I know I kind of cut you off. That's my point, is that whatever the new right is going to be, it cannot back down from these culture war fights.
Right. And to your point, we've ceded a lot of the culture, and part of that is trying to rebuild those institutions through journalism. And that's what I loved about your piece, was that it was purely journalistic. And it's disappointing to see people like Jonah or some of the more classical liberal people being so upset about this, because that's part of a journalist's job. And so it was nice seeing that on Quillette, and seeing you just writing what they're saying, what they're talking about. And I think that's important. But the other thing I liked about it was it's hard in some ways to pin the new right and just what is it about. And that's why I loved about this piece, because it clarified a lot of things, and Cal can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's what we loved about it, was it just really clarified some things about where they want to go, why they want to do this. And I can tell you some of their aims, I'm all supportive, of. I would love to see something to be done about, not having kids and stuff like that. I think that's important. And it seems like a lot of the right today doesn't want to talk about it, because then you're doing something, you're kind of going to the VDARE side or whatever. And no, it's not about that. It's just there's something important about having kids and having a family, and we just shouldn't give that up, because now a man and a man can marry and have, all that stuff. And so anyway, just wanted to say that your work and what you did was really important in my opinion.
I really appreciate that. And I tried to get that across in the piece, the idea that in many ways, folks like Patrick Deneen and others, and I spent a lot of time focusing on Patrick Deneen because he talks a lot about the ideas. And I think his mode of engagement, I think, is really constructive. But a lot of what drives, I think, the new right is this idea that the family has to be preserved. Paradoxically, if you want to preserve liberty, then we might need to start thinking about ways in which we can support the family. Even the founders agreed on this, is that, of course, in order to preserve liberty, you need to have a moral, religious, virtuous people capable of self-governing. And if we start to lose that, then maybe we don't deserve our freedom. And even as a libertarian, I believe that if we can't self-govern, if we can't have our own children, if we can't make a living, if our institutions are corrupt, maybe we have to start over. Maybe we need to produce something new.
Yeah, I want to also kind of hit on this point about about journalism, just straight up journalism, because I think one of the things where both the right and the left are struggling to make the sort of headway that they want to is we've come to a point where we exist in different realities. Not everybody, but I mean, like, there are parts of what we can even talk about, just the idea that the election was stolen, straight up kind of thing, or QAnon conspiracies or different things. People live in a reality that they can continually create for themselves. And I've said for a long time that one of the, perhaps the most important aspect, and when you talk about the building institutions or getting involved in the culture and things like that from a conservative point of view, I've always said the most important thing that we need to do is just kind of help to reestablish what reality is, what the facts are, what we can agree on is real and not real. And so what I love to see, and I like this about the Dispatch too, because I distinguish between their opinion pieces and what they send out in their newsletter, and which is really good reporting. There are people who can do a great job of just telling us what is, and then let people decide. And what we've seen for so long is these silos of information that tell you how you should see the world, even if they don't act like they're telling you. And now they almost straight up are. This was the criticism of the mainstream media for a long time, and the reason conservative media was created. And instead, conservative media seems to have become almost the same thing that it's been criticizing, to the point that the left and the right don't agree on basic reality. So it seems before we can even begin to build the other aspects of culture and not have them siloed off, we need to come back to this idea of the shared reality, back to this idea of just kind of unified view of what America is, in order to even have those views of culture cross these lines and persuade people of the other side of the many sides that exist in the United States. So anyway, that's my way of saying, again, coming back around, I appreciate that despite your disagreements with the new right, you've talked about what they say, what they believe, who they are in a straight up way. And readers can go and read the piece, which we'll put a link up to, and decide what do they think. Maybe there is something that they agree with, maybe they don't, but they know what it is they have an opinion on now, and they have a clear view of it and understand how it's distinguished from other parts of conservatism. So anyway, we're coming up on an hour here, so we will, I think, close things up there. But Jordan Alexander Hill, we appreciate you being on the program to talk about your piece on the new right. And we will, again, we'll post in the show notes a link to it so our audience can check it out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a nice conversation, fellas. Be in touch.
Absolutely. Will do.